Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Welcome back to another episode of Berean Spirits, right here on the YouTube and the Facebook and all the podcasts that you can handle. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri. We've got Richard Dodson with the Kearney Church of Christ in Kearney, Missouri. Richard, man, you doing all right today?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I'm just trying to. I'm forgot to send links out to. You mentioned the social media.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, Facebook's getting to be such just a waste of time.
Yeah.
They really are. I hate to say it, but I mean, it's just getting, so hard to put anything on it. It's just, and not only that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there doesn't need to be there. But
I haven't been on Facebook this year.
Richard posts.
So I don't know. I don't get on Facebook. I'll post on the church's Facebook page, but personally, I avoid Facebook like the plague, man. Like it's the coronavirus.
Well, I think a lot of people are maybe doing that. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't know. But
they just make it so hard. Like now, I cannot put a direct feed on the Gospel Preaching Live's Facebook page. I can do it to Kearney's Facebook page. I can't do it to Gospel Preaching Live.
That just don't make sense.
That doesn't make any sense. But crazy. I just share it. After the show, I'll just move it over to Gospel Preaching Live. But doesn't it seem silly?
It does. Is it on Southside's Facebook?
It should be whatever we have on the.
Yeah, that'd be Southside's. Yeah.
But whatever I'm setting up a show and I put it to all our links. It always stops on the Gospel Preaching Live Facebook page, and I have to omit that before I can set up a show.
Huh. It did that when I had to set it up a couple of weeks ago, and then a little bit later, it allowed me to put it back on.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just the guy who hosts Gospel Preaching Live, I think.
It may be. I don't know.
Having to see his face on camera just kind of ruins the whole thing.
And that great voice you guys are listening to now with the face that goes with it is Josh Thornhill with the Brookmead Church of Christ over in Johnson City, Tennessee. Josh, you doing all right, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm trying to figure out what the weather wants to do.
Dude, I have no idea. Oh man, yesterday I was freezing. We hit 50 degrees as a high.
You've been dodging tornadoes.
Well, yeah, we had tornadoes roll through Monday night, north side of Springfield, and some of our members were in the direct path, but thankfully everybody is good and well. But the weather was pretty crazy. We barely got a drop of rain on the south side of Springfield, and they were getting hammered on the north side. It's crazy. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we were like near 80 on Tuesday, like near 80 degrees. I don't remember exactly what the high was, but it was close to 80, if not 80. And we had a tornado watch Tuesday night. And then yesterday you wake up and we had a high in the low 50s. And then today our high is 48.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and it's 40 degrees right now and rainy. So I don't know what the weather wants to do.
I don't know. It'll figure itself out pretty soon. It'll be so hot. We'll be like, oh, it's so hot. Just like when it was so cold, we're like, oh, it's so cold. But anyway, but the great thing about the Word of God is it's not like the weather. It does not change.
It's not fickle.
The Word of God it lives and abides forever. And so we can stick with that and know that, that it's not going to fluctuate like this. There is no turning or changing. And so whatever it says, we can have our faith and confidence in it.
Not everybody agrees with what you just said.
No, they sure don't. But it doesn't mean that it isn't true.
No. Couldn't change the fact.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. They feelings over facts or whatever it is people have. But anyway, we're going to be talking about youth, the responsibility and what we can do to encourage our youth. And I think we're going to approach this two different ways. We're going to talk about it just as individuals, what we should be doing and need to be doing. And then if we can get into it, because I think it's important to talk about the work that the local church can engage in by authority when it comes to the youth as well. And so that's what we're going to be getting into and talking about today. And I think there's a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And Josh, before we went on the air, we were kind of talking of all three of us were talking about this a little bit. And you had made a few great little comments and points, but really about youth falling away and some of the reasons why, and just really an epidemic, it would seem, with youth falling away from the Lord. Whether it's just leaving religion as a whole, right? I mean, you've got those falling away from in the Lord's church, but even in the denominational world, you have those who are just leaving religion and the idea that there is a God altogether.
Right. And, throughout the Bible, we find God placing an emphasis upon teaching your children. I mean, go read the book of Exodus from chapter 12 onward. In chapter 12, you have really the final plague there. And I believe it's chapters 12 and 13. You have the final plague that takes place there as God institutes the Passover feast, as he tells Israel that he wants them to, observe this feast and what it's going to symbolize. And then from there on, as God starts to establish his laws, one of the things that impressed me in the book of Exodus is how many times God comes back to the idea of when your children ask you, why do you do this? This is what I want you to tell them. He over and over and over again emphasizes you need to tell your children about what I've done for you, about who I am and what I've done. And we find a sad commentary in the book of Judges, chapter 2, where it says a generation arose that did not know God. And you look around us today, and I think we can say that there's a generation around us that does not know God. Mm-hmm. And there's a generation, and one of the concepts that is becoming common today, more popular, is deconstruction. You're hearing that phrase a lot, deconstruction. People are deconstructing their faith as they're abandoning their faith. And there's been studies, like Chris has pointed out, there seems to be an epidemic of young people leaving their faith. And I don't know if it's more so today than it ever was, but maybe with the social media, they have more of a voice to express that. I don't really know, but at the end of the day, it is a serious, serious problem that has been that we're dealing with, and the church is not immune to it. We need to be aware of that. But there have been studies that have been done and really trying to understand why it is that young people are losing their faith and what we can do to prevent them from losing their faith. And I think kind of tying into our study this morning is one of the biggest reasons is that churches or young people do not have intergenerational relationships. And that means they don't have older people within the church that can mentor them and that they can, have a close relationship with, that they can learn from, that they can, kind of talk to about spiritual things. And that is a biblical pattern. You find it in the book of Titus, chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. He talks about older men, verse 2, are to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, and love and perseverance. Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, on and on. And then he says, likewise, urge the younger men, verse 6, to be sensible and showing yourselves to be a model of good works with purity and doctrine, dignified, sound in word, which is irreproachable, so that the opponent will be put to shame, having nothing bad to say. And we skip verse 4 though, where he says that older women can instruct the younger women. We need to appreciate the fact that older people have a responsibility to build relationships with the younger generations. And I realize that there's two sides to that discussion. The younger people have to be willing to do so, but parents, you need to encourage your children to want to build relationships with the older people, to hear some of the stories that they have to tell, to hear some of the lessons that they have to give, and to be able to build relationships with older people. I remember when I was younger, and I guess this kind of just happened naturally, but there was an older man that I was quite close with. And I remember in before and after services, I would go and I would talk with him before, to just kind of talk about things, building a relationship with an older man. And so that's important. And having those older spiritual role models, aside from even their parents, is a crucial part, something that God has given us that we need to be taking advantage of, and we need to be taking that seriously.
That is something that, I'll be honest with you, I've not that I haven't seen that and encouraged it, but I've kind of missed that aspect of it from the scriptures, and I've been frustrated so much. And Richard, I think you've gone through some of the same things when you have a family visit and then they leave and they go somewhere else. And what's often the reason that they do that?
Oh, there's not enough kids where you're at.
Yeah, right. They want their kids to be around other kids, right? And if over the course of 3 years, right, just to throw out a number, if all the families that did that would have stayed, how many kids would we have, right? In some of these smaller works, and sometimes the parents don't consider that, but at the same time, I don't think they consider what you just pointed out at all, right? They want their kids to be around other kids, and no thought or regard for something that you just brought up from Titus, and the responsibility and the encouragement that can be had in that intergenerational relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, Richard, go ahead.
You didn't ask me anything.
Okay.
Yeah,
Richard, do you have anything to say?
Oh, there you go.
I have to form it in the. Is this Jeopardy?
No. Yeah.
You must form your response in the question.
Yeah. Okay. I got a lot to say about this, and but I don't want to be as long-winded as Josh was. But needless. I'm kidding.
Because you'd put people to sleep.
And I'm trying to prioritize what I really want to get one thing particularly out. My youngest sons are out to turn 20 years old in June. And there's been a lot of things that he went through, that my daughter went through, that were revelations to me. Things that I had no idea that they were facing. And I really think when we're looking at our youth today, for me, I was under the assumption that the things that they were facing were the things that I faced. And that's just a bad assumption, because the problems our youth are facing today are unique for them compared to what I went through. And I'll give you an example. When I was a young boy, when we went trick-or-treating, for example, when me and my sister, we didn't have our parents with us. And we'd take our bicycles and we hit neighborhoods, and there was no fear of anybody hurting us. It was just a different world we lived in. And so compared to today, I mean, if you were to go trick-or-treating, for example, with your kids, you better be with them. So, I mean, it's just a different world. And the things that children are facing in high school are different than the things that I faced in high school. And, the scriptures do teach us things. And, in the world that we live in today, there's a lot of broken families. And Ephesians 6:4, as Josh pointed out, it's really on the fathers, to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But in many cases, there's no father there because, marriages have been broken. And that has affected the church. We've seen that at church. And there's always been that talk about, taking care of our widows and orphans. And, that usually when we talk about that at church, it goes one way, but we never really think of the children who are lacking in parents, and even the parents that they don't have the skills necessary to be able to help them. And so, we have to look to the needs of the children today. We have to look at what they're facing. We have to look upon their needs. And then, as Josh said, we need to be willing to step in and help. And I think that's just absolutely vital. If we're more willing to do that, then I think that can be a help toward teaching these children to be faithful to the Lord, because the very things that they're supposed to have to help them, in many cases, they're just not there. And so where else are they supposed to look to? Josh made it very clear. And so there's no reason why an older Christian, man, or an older Christian woman can't look to younger people at church and say, what can I do to help them? Because they are facing attacks that, let's face it. At the schools they're going to, there's a local school up here in Kansas City that just found out was putting kitty litter out now in their bathrooms for those furries. Those are kids who identify as animals. You got boys who identify as girls that identify as boys. Those kind of things weren't even imagined in my day. That wasn't even imagined. But these are things that are facing our youth. My son, I was shocked. My son told me that kids taking drugs at his school, he wouldn't be surprised if it was up to 70%. And I was just flabbergasted by that. I couldn't believe it was so high. So you can see then that the problems that our children face are different than the problems that we faced when we were younger. And we can't be so naive to that. We got to understand what they're facing, and then we have to be willing to step up and help.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ephesians 6 makes it clear there is a primary responsibility to the father and to parents, right? Parents have a primary responsibility. But I think we also see from what you guys have talked about, mentioned, and Josh bringing up Titus, it's not a sole responsibility. And even in Ephesians 6, I want to point this out. And as we look at things that we can do to encourage the youth and to help them, the book of Ephesians, right, was written to the saints in Ephesus. And there's no doubt that letter would be read to the church in Ephesus. And in doing so, right, he talks about that there are evangelists, elders, and pastors and teachers, Ephesians 4, verse 11, that we are in verse 4 or chapter 4, verses 11 through 16, not only equipping the saints for the work of ministry, but being joined and knit together by which every part does its share, talking about the work and role within the local congregation. And the very fact that Ephesians 6, is there and talks about, fathers, train up your children. Then he says, and children, obey your parents, right? Well, who is doing the instruction and who are they instructing? It is the church instructing the kids, because that letter is being read in the congregation of God's people in Ephesus, and it is specifically addressing the kids. And so, yes, churches have a responsibility to teach the children, right? As a church, uh, as well as the fathers, as well as the older men and the younger, the older women to the younger women, which means that the youth have a responsibility to listen, right, and to pay attention and desire that, which is sometimes difficult. But that gets into what we can do, right? What can we do? And first and foremost, I think, as we've mentioned, not only being examples, but taking an interest. I think sometimes we don't take that interest. We want to pass that off onto the instead of their own generation, right? And listen, if you think that your kids are going to um, on their own desire the that relationship with the older folks, rather than their own generation, I think you'll be sadly mistaken. And then if they rely upon others for teaching and training, what are those other kids being taught and what are they teaching your kids? We need to have an interest in that, and we need to do our best to be an influence with that.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Josh.
I want to add to kind of what Richard was saying about what all is going on in today's world. 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 32, you find within this context describing the numbers of the companies equipped for military duty who had come to David at Hebron to turn the kingdom of Saul to him according to the command of Yahweh. Verse 32, it describes of the sons of Issachar, men who knew how to discern the time to know what Israel should do. They knew how to discern the times. We need people like that who know how to discern the times to be able to guide people in the way that we should go. And we need to take upon ourselves realize the responsibility that we have. Talking about Ephesians 4, it is the church's responsibility to teach. And I think as far as children is concerned, first and foremost, that responsibility comes at home.
Yeah.
Parents training their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The church is not the primary,
right,
and does not have the primary responsibility of teaching. And if the church is the primary teaching that gives the primary teaching your child is receiving, you're failing as a parent, and their children is woefully lacking. But two, the church is there to supply or to kind of build upon what the parents have been able to give at home. And so, we do need to find opportunities to build relationships with the younger generations. And I think it's not always going to be, within the assembly. I think where it needs to start is outside of the assembly, building relationships with just one another. And maybe that's going to look like having the older folks over to your home and enjoying a board game together, or maybe going fishing with the older and a young boy going fishing with an older man at church, or maybe going to the gun range or something like that, just to be able to allow them to build a relationship with each other, so that way the older men can be an influence on the younger man in a spiritual sense. It's as I've grown older, I've really come to appreciate just how important the relational aspect of our faith is. And if the only relationship that we have with our brethren is confined to the four walls of the church building, we're failing in being the family that God wants us to be. And we're not going to be the family that God wants us to be. And we're not going to have the influence upon one another that God wants us to have upon one another. You find in Acts chapter 2, think about how hostile of an environment the early Christians had as they sought to stand firm in their faith. And they had the Jews trying to oppress them. And then later on, they had the government of Rome trying to oppress them. what do we find them doing? Acts 2, they met together daily in the temple and ate their bread from house to house. They were together. They formed a community to where they could be of an encouragement to one another and that they could strengthen one another. And we need that for ourselves, but we especially need that with our children, to be able to give them that environment where they can develop their faith. And I will say, I do want to add on top of this, we need, one of the things that we desperately need as far as our young people are concerned is we need to give them room to grow. And that means we need to give them room to doubt. And that sounds weird, but we don't want, we want our children to develop their own faith. I don't want them growing up and just believing what I've taught them to believe. I want them to believe what the Bible says because it's what the Bible says. And so sometimes, kids are going to have questions because maybe, we worship a certain way and they see a little clip on the internet where they see something different and they say, well, why can't we do that? And then if we give them a short, abrupt answer like, well, that's just not authorized. Questions that aren't answered well don't go away. And so when we give them those curt, abrupt answers, what they're going to learn to do is to suppress those questions. I can't trust this person to bring my doubts and questions to them. And so what they're going to do is they're going to find somebody else who they can get answers from, albeit unscriptural answers, and they're going to be led astray. And so we need to be patient with young people, especially as they're growing and developing in their faith, because they're going to have questions. And we need to deal gently with them as they understand, as they work through these questions of their faith, and to be able to help them and guide them in the way, the proper way to be able to find the answers to their questions. And we're all going to have doubts and things of our own at times, and we need to know how to deal with those properly. And that's part of guiding the young people in those things.
And you know how children are being taught today to find their answers to their questions is to Google it, and now they're being encouraged to listen to AI. And of course we know AI is programmed, and not all of AI's answers. I mean, AI's answers I would not trust for spiritual guidance. But that's what they're being taught to do. That's the common way in which children are being educated. And so to get back to what Josh was saying, it is important to build relationships with the children at church. Number one, you need to be able to identify what they're going through. And that's hard to do because it changes all the time. And then number two, you got to remember the devil's coming after them because this is when they're vulnerable. Lions, they usually go after the young of a herd because they're easier to catch. And the devil's no different. He wants to catch children while they're young. And so we need to build relationships so that they will, they'll come to us with the questions that they may be trying to face. And it is it's a difficult task, but I really want to get back to what I was saying earlier, and it was James 1:27 when I was mentioning before that pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. And the church that I have been associated with, all my life, that verse has been associated with controversy over, churches throwing money at orphans' homes. But, I'm really asking everybody to look at this a little different, because when Josh mentioned the fact about having a generation that doesn't know God, I think we can go more than one. When we look at the marital situation in our country today, we're seeing, even in the churches, we're seeing children who may have a mother, they may even have a father, but they may have, one without the other. They're missing both of them. And then even if they have two, the parents may not be equipped to help them as they need. They may be new converts. They may need more training. Um, in a sense, and this is what I'm asking the listeners to do. I want you to look upon these children kind of as an orphan because they don't have someone who can step in as a parent and provide everything that they need spiritually. And so, building a relationship with such a one to me is like visiting the orphans. I mean, you're seeing someone who has a need and you're looking to fulfill that need. And so you want to build a relationship and you got to be aware of the things that child needs. One thing I've been noticing is many children today just don't date. And the boys and girls are just going longer and longer without dating. And I don't understand why that is. To me, I guess I do understand to a point. I was talking to one young man, and he kind of lives in fear of going up to a girl and then finding out she's a man. That kind of stuff is going on today. So I mean, that's just totally different than when I lived. But needless to say, there is a real need for companionship, good companionship. And unfortunately, many of these kids are finding their companion on the social media and on video games. And, not all social media is bad and not all video games are bad. But, having older Christians who might provide some type of avenue in which children can have interaction, that can be valuable. When I was a younger person, I really wanted to be around other Christians, young Christians. I wanted to be able to have fun with them. And we had parents, who would have the kids over on a Friday or Saturday night and for get-togethers. And those were fun. We would play games. We would do different things. That's something that Christians need to look into. And what's really sad is our Bible classes at church. It's really hard to find people who are willing to teach a Bible class. But in all honesty, anyone who takes their responsibility, if people are taking their responsibility in the Lord serious, there should be people fighting for the right to teach Bible classes to the kids. I mean, that should never, ever be a problem. But, it has been a problem. It's a serious problem. And
Richard, with that, if you don't mind me interrupting, if that's okay.
No, just go ahead and butt right in.
Yeah, thanks, man. Who is always, and I'm talking always, given the responsibility of teaching the kids when it comes to kids' Bible classes? Who's told to do that, or who's asked to do that?
Well, usually the parents.
What parent?
Oh, the mother.
Yeah. Right. And in part, maybe it is right. We're trying to do something, get women more involved in a way that they can be involved. But I think in another sense, we've gotten to the point where men look at that's not, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't teach kids classes, right? That's for the women to do. We've taken on this attitude, I think, in a sense that kind of prevents some of that from happening. Yes, we ought to be teachers. Hebrews 5 verse 12. By now you ought to be teachers. But it comes to at one sense, as he points out in verse 14, by reason of use, having your senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Sometimes we doubt ourselves and our own ability, but in the same time, because we're not using what we've learned in our everyday life. In other words, we're not living faithfully. we understand we're probably not equipped to teach in a public setting. But I think sometimes we delegate or relegate that responsibility for the wrong reasons.
Well, needless to say, it should be done. It needs to be done.
Absolutely.
And there should be enough people qualified to do it and they should want to do it. I mean, I shouldn't have to twist anybody's arm to get them to teach a Bible class. That's just, well, I'll do it today. Yeah, I hear that. I'll do it for today. Well, no, I'm looking for somebody to make a commitment here. I mean, the kids need somebody to make a commitment. And it's just, I've done it for so many years, it's like, and I understand, you can lean on one person for a long time. I understand that, where they want to see other people take part. But the bottom line is, if those people aren't taking part, if they're not doing it, it isn't getting done. And so that's a real problem that I've had to face. I'm assuming others have too, but it needs to be done. And if we're not even willing to teach the Bible to our youth, then the building companionship, and doing things like that, well, that's not going to be done either. And then what's going to be the end result? Well, like Josh said, we're going to have a generation that doesn't know God. And pretty soon you're going to have more than one generation that doesn't know God. And so that's where we find ourselves today. And that's why we're here. And so we really need to start taking our responsibilities toward the youth a whole lot more serious. This whole idea that we just come to church on Sunday and take the Lord's Supper and go home, we're good. No, you're not good. You're not serving God. You're just coming and doing one thing. Serving God is a daily commitment. And if you're not any more committed than just Sunday mornings, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to heaven.
Yeah. And Josh, to a point you made earlier, I was thinking about Hebrews chapter 3, where somewhere around verses 11 through 13 or so, he talks about exhorting one another daily, right? And then again in Hebrews chapter 10, he talks about kind of the same idea, but the idea of daily, this taking place on a regular basis, I think is something important for us to do as a whole. But I think we should take a focus and an interest on the youth.
The Apostle Paul had two sons in the faith that the Bible refers to, and that's Timothy and Paul.
Yeah,
he refers to them as, I'm sorry, who did I say?
Paul.
Yeah,
Paul Jr.
Paul Jr. Did you remember Paul Jr.? Paul had two sons in the faith, Timothy and Titus. And well, I told you, you got to read in the lines what I'm saying. But my point being is 1 Corinthians 11:1 says we are to be imitators of Paul as he is of Christ. Well, if that's the case, and Paul was building relationships with young men, and he so much to the point where he refers to them as sons in the faith, what are we doing? I mean, we got to get busy building relationships with the youth of our church. If we're not, we're not there to help them. And, what did Jesus say about those who put a stumbling block in front of the little ones? Better for a millstone to be hung around their neck and cast into the sea. Well, I mean, we are the stumbling block for the youth of our church if we're not stepping up to help them. They're under attack. They're under serious attack. And we know what we can do to help them. Why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we step up to help?
Go ahead, Josh.
I think about a verse that we've often looked at, but it's 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. And Paul tells Timothy, the things that you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Let me suggest that that's not just an instruction to preachers. That's not just those who are going to take upon themselves the role of an evangelist. That is, all Christians have a responsibility to entrust the things that they have heard and entrust them to faithful men who can teach others also. We are equipping others to teach, and we all can take part in that. We all must take part in that if the church is to fully thrive in the way that it ought to. You know, I was having a conversation last night. You think about over the past maybe 15, 20 years, or even longer, many of these great men of faith, as we might call them, giants of our faith, who have preached for a number of years, and they fought all these battles of through the divisions that took place, all the various issues that have ravaged the brotherhood. They stood firm. They fought for the truth. They're gone. They've passed away, and they've had to pass on the torch to the next generation. And the reality is the church today is standing on their shoulders because they were the ones who stood firm, who stood upon the foundation, and they've passed it on. And the question is, who's going to carry that? Who's going to keep carrying that torch?
Who's going to fill their shoes?
Who's going to carry that banner?
That's George Jones' song. That's a good point.
And the thing is, you know, what I see a lot today is a bunch of preachers who aren't taking hard, firm stands. They're softening the truth of the gospel. They're softening the message of authority and the message of you know, the work of the church, and they're blurring these lines, and they're paving the way for another generation that does not know God. And the faithful brethren have to pick up the torch and
that's a good point. If the youth are not seeing the preacher stand up to opposition, and I mean boldly stand up to opposition and basically say I'm not wavering, and you know, and if they don't see that, if they don't see the battles taking place, then how are they going to know how to fight? I mean, I agree with Josh. When I was younger, I used to see preachers, you know, there was a lot of debates held, but I don't see that taking place anymore. And so, yeah, I mean, where's the younger generation of preachers? Where are they learning to do the work? And that's a good point as well. Those things need to be, you know, I think example is what Josh is trying to get at. You know, we need to be setting a good example for the youth. And we have blurred lines. You know, that's funny because that kind of goes along. I was thinking about doing a sermon on, I don't like the title, but I'll go ahead and say it. But I was trying to think of a good way to title it, but people are trying to dilute Jesus. You know, when you go and you buy a cleaning solution and it says you got to mix this solution in water before you use it, you know, because you got to dilute it. And some people are looking at the Bible and the Bible's teachings, and they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, okay, in order for us to use this, we have to dilute it.
Yeah,
because we got to water it down because, you know, what Jesus did is way too strong, you know, for the people of today. And so they're diluting Jesus, you could say. And, you know, that's never a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I think in some of this, you know, we have individual responsibilities, and we've mentioned the church, you know, also taking on some of that responsibility as well. But one of the things we've got to be careful is keeping focus on spiritual things. Right. Yes, we can have some physical things in common. Josh mentioned, you know, several things that we can do to, you know, to go out and share different things, share experiences with our youth. But as a local church, sometimes we we completely shift focus from spiritual things to physical things. And that's just something the church should not be doing, right? The church has no authority for those things when it comes to, these gymnasiums and family life centers and all these things that, that churches have gotten into to put their focus on merely the physical and the worldly things, and build worldly relationships rather than, sticking with the spiritual. And
Well,
I think
Chris, you don't need those things.
no,
I mean, you can go to a park and find a basketball goal. I mean, if you're wanting to have a gymnasium for kids to play basketball, go to the park. There's a park right there. Right down the street from Kearney is one of the best parks you'll ever find. There's all kinds of things for kids to play on, and they got a great basketball court, concrete court, even has glass backboards. I mean, it's super fantastic. And they got facilities there that you can rent, if you want to have an indoor get together. I mean, it's just an amazing place that the city provides. And so there's no reason I know where you're going. There's no authority for that, but there's no even reason it's just foolishness to throw the Lord's money or even anybody's money towards such a thing when those things are already provided by the government. So, it's nonsense to waste resources like that when we can be using the money as we've been authorized to do, and that's in proclaiming God's word. So, yeah, there's no reason to be associated with that type of thing. But now these other deals, though, I want to go back, like, we mentioned Josh shooting guns. Josh has guns. He likes to shoot guns. He likes to, go skeet shooting, hunting, things of that nature. But here's the deal. If Josh takes a young person hunting, there's a lot of times, Chris and I go fishing. I cannot tell you how much religious discussion Chris and I have when we're fishing. Because it's not all just reeling in a fish, especially on my side. It's, we go out for breakfast, we drive in a truck to go to where we're fishing. We're sitting, waiting for the fish to bite, and I've had sermons that have come to mind when Chris and I have been together. And so when we are associating, that's just me and Chris, when we're associating with the youth, that's a perfect opportunity for the older Christian to talk about spiritual things with the youth, find out what they're going through. First of all, listen to the things that they're going through, and then make the spiritual application. And that would be very beneficial to them.
yeah. And as much as we can stress, and I think it's always been stressed from my growing up, even without religious family, it was, pay attention and listen to the older folks, not just out of respect, but you might learn something, right? Well, sometimes we need to remind the older folks to listen to the youth, right? It's a two-way street. Pay attention and listen to them. Take that interest, because when you show an interest in them, they're more apt to listen to what you have to say, because you've shown concern and interest in what they're going through, their interest in those types of things. They're more apt to listen to what you have to say and look to your example. And
my grandpa used to he taught me how to fish, which we'll blame him. But he took me fishing when I was younger, and he also took me to church. And I bought his old truck. It's sitting over in the barn, and I bought it for that very reason. It's because that old man, he took that much interest in me to take me to church, and he took me to teach me to fish. And, that made me want to buy that truck because of my memories I had of him. And that's how much influence, if you think back and if you can think of someone older who took interest in you, you can be that person. And when they become of age, they will fully appreciate the time that you spent with them. Who knows, how much that's going to benefit them. But I know of brethren who took time with me, and I'd like to be able to say thank you, but they moved on. But they took the time when they were here, and I'm sure grateful that they did, and that's what we need to do today.
Josh, give us some last thoughts, brother.
Well, I just want to add that, when I mentioned the idea of, the fishing and the hunting or whatever it is you want to do, the purpose of that is just to be able to build rapport with one another, so that way you can have a foundation upon which you can build spiritual things. That's the ultimate goal, building relationships. And I think that's part of why brethren ought to be spending time together outside of the assembly, is so that we can build relationships with one another, so that we can have deeper conversations in a spiritual level.
Develop trust.
Exactly. And I think our churches are going to be better off when we are the family that God wants us to be. I mean, go figure. Maybe God knew what he was talking about, right? But I remember, my granddad, before he passed away, he was preaching for, over 60 years. And I remember every time, like, I would visit them or I would talk to him, I remember, one of the last things he would always say was keep the faith, or something of that nature. Always give me that encouragement. And the idea is he was urging me to carry the torch, to maintain that. He was encouraging me in that, to walk and to maintain that stand upon the truth that he had, taken up many, many years before. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to pass the torch on to the next generation. And that really ought to be scary, that we have to leave it to the next generation. But we can do our best to make sure that they're ready to carry it. And that's what God has given us the responsibility to do.
Yeah.
We can try. Is it so hard to try? I mean, that's what we're looking at, is instead of just not even trying, let's at least put forth an effort to, it's sad. I mean, we had something at church. I was talking about those furries earlier. That came about. That information came to us from someone who works at a school district's administration building, and the whole church was just like, they were stunned to hear. Well, we thought maybe we've heard the stories. We thought that was on the East Coast, the West Coast, but to think it was happening here at home, and they were literally shocked. And I think if church members knew that, if they knew everything that was going on with our youth today, they might be shocked.
Yeah.
And so, if you think they're just going to be faithful to the Lord just from some type of coming to church and learning by osmosis kind of thing, no, that's not going to happen. We have to take up the sword, and we're going to have to go out there and defend them as they battle against Satan. And if not, then it's better we hang a millstone around our neck and cast us in the sea, because that's just most unfortunate. You know what? I've already decided I'm going to preach on this Sunday. This is a very serious topic.
Yeah, it is.
And this is something that really needs to be. We need to start chirping on this a little bit more. Not a little bit more, a lot more.
Yeah.
And not chirping either. We need to be yelling about it.
Get it out there, man. Let's do that. Absolutely. Folks, we appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens to Berean Spirits, whether it is on all the social medias or on the podcast. Be sure and share it out with all your friends and family. Give us a thumbs up, a like, and a great review. on however you listen to us. We would appreciate that also. Until next week, remember to search the scriptures with Berean spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep studying that Bible.